In Maine, the designer woman stayed in town when the rich man returned to the same café. The bell above the café door rang once, not loud enough to interrupt anything, but enough for a few heads to lift. Caleb Rowan stepped inside and stopped just long enough for the room to notice him. Wet boots on old wood, a dark coat brushed clean by habit, not care. He did not scan the room. He did not hesitate. He moved the way someone moves when the distance between entrance and table is already known. The café had not changed. Same narrow counter. Same chalkboard menu written by the same hand. Same window facing the harbor, fogged at the edges where warm air met cold glass. It was early, the hour when locals came in alone and left alone, when conversation stayed low and unfinished. Someone at the counter paused mid-pour. Someone near the window followed him with their eyes longer than necessary. Someone else did not look at him at all, but noticed the pause. Caleb took the table near the back, the one against the wall, the one with a view of the door and the harbor both, if he knew how to sit. He set his gloves down neatly. He did not take out his phone. He did not look around again. A woman 2 tables away adjusted her chair slightly, just enough to see his face more clearly. She had seen him before, not recently, long enough ago that the memory felt unfinished. The waitress approached, already holding a mug. "Black," she said, not asking. Caleb nodded once. The mug landed in front of him without ceremony. Steam rose, thin and steady. He wrapped his hands around it, but did not drink yet. Outside, the fog rolled slowly across the harbor, softening the outlines of boats that had not moved since dawn. Across the room, Iris Calder was already seated. She had been there before him. She always was on mornings like this. Her coat was draped over the back of her chair, fabric worn but clean. A canvas bag rested at her feet, folded inward as if to take up less space than it needed. In front of her lay a sketchbook, open but untouched, a pencil resting across the page. She did not look up when the bell rang. Not immediately. She noticed the shift. First, the brief quiet that passed through the room, like a held breath that never fully formed. She noticed the waitress pause. She noticed the way someone near the window turned and then turned back too quickly. Only then did Iris lift her eyes. She did not stare. She did not register surprise. Her gaze moved to Caleb, then past him, then settled again on the empty space of the page in front of her. Caleb did not look at her. That too was noticed. A man near the door leaned back in his chair and murmured something to the woman with him. She glanced once, then nodded. No names were spoken. None were needed. Caleb lifted the mug and took his first sip. The coffee was hot enough to slow him down. He placed it back in the same spot, aligning it carefully with the edge of the table. Iris turned a page in her sketchbook. The sound was soft, but in the quiet of the room it carried. She adjusted the pencil with her thumb and rested her hand again. Outside, a gull cried somewhere above the fog, unseen. No one spoke to Caleb. No one welcomed him back. No one asked how long he would stay. But people watched. They watched the way he sat. They watched the way he drank. They watched the fact that he had come back to the same cafe at the same hour and taken the same table. And Iris, who had never left, sat where she always did, doing what she always did, aware that this time someone else was watching too. Morning in the coastal town did not arrive all at once. It unfolded in layers. First came the light, pale and thin, filtered through low clouds that pressed close to the water. Then the sound of the ocean, steady and unhurried, waves breaking without force, as if they had learned this shoreline too well to argue with it. After that came movement, slow doors opening, boots on gravel, a truck engine turning over once, then twice. The cafe where Caleb Rowan had taken his seat was only one room in a town that woke the same way every day. Outside, the street curved gently toward the harbor. It did not run straight, as if it had been shaped by years of walking rather than planning. Houses leaned into the wind, their paint softened by salt and time. Wooden steps creaked under weight they recognized. Porches held chairs that stayed, even when no one sat in them. Fog clung to everything in the early hours. It settled low along the dock, wrapping ropes, piling softly against hulls, dulling the sharp edges of cleats and posts. The fishing boats rocked in place, not from urgency, but from habit. Nets hung to dry, stiff with yesterday's work, smelling faintly of salt and iron. A gull called somewhere out of sight. Then another answered, farther away. Caleb left the cafe after finishing his coffee. He stepped back into the cold air without adjusting his coat. The wind was damp, carrying the weight of the sea with it. It pressed against his face and moved on. No one followed him. No one needed to. He walked toward the harbor at the pace the town seemed to require. Not fast enough to be noticed. Not slow enough to stand out. His boots found the familiar, uneven places in the sidewalk, the shallow dip near the post office, the cracked stone by the corner shop that sold bait, stamps, and coffee filters in the same narrow aisle. A man unlocking the hardware store glanced up. He nodded once. Caleb nodded back. That was enough. Across the street, Iris Calder lifted the metal gate of her workshop. The sound rang briefly in the quiet morning before settling back into stillness. The building was narrow, wood-paneled, with a single large window that caught the light when the clouds thinned just enough. Inside, bolts of fabric were stacked by weight and texture rather than color. A work table stood near the window, marked by years of cutting and measuring. Iris stepped inside and closed the door behind her, leaving the gate half raised. She did not turn on the overhead lights yet. The morning light was sufficient. It always was. The town moved around her without interruption. At the end of the dock, two fishermen worked without speaking, hands moving in practiced rhythm as they checked lines and folded rope. A truck passed slowly on the road above, tires hissing against damp pavement. Somewhere farther inland, a door shut. Then another. Caleb paused near the edge of the harbor. He stood where the dock met land, where it gave way to stone. He rested his hands in his pockets and looked out, not searching for anything in particular. The water reflected the gray sky, broken only by the quiet movement of boats that had nowhere else to be. Winter light in Maine did not try to flatter. It revealed what was there and left the rest alone. A thin mist began to fall. Not rain exactly, more like the air deciding to settle. Caleb continued walking, following the curve of the road that traced the coastline. It bent around the water, past houses set back behind low fences, past a bench facing the sea that rarely held more than one person at a time. The road rose slightly, then dipped again, as if it had been shaped by weather rather than intention. Behind him, the town kept going. The café filled slowly. A couple took the window table. A woman set down a bag of groceries and rubbed her hands together for warmth before ordering. Someone mentioned the weather, not to complain, but to acknowledge it. In the workshop, Iris laid her coat over the back of her chair. She ran her hand once over a length of wool, checking the weave. The fabric held its shape. She folded it back carefully and reached for another. Outside, someone noticed the cafe door swing open again. Someone else noticed that Caleb Rowan was no longer there. The space he had occupied returned to being just a table. Along the harbor road, Caleb passed the small church with its weathered siding and narrow windows. The doors were closed. They often were. The building stood anyway, a place shaped more by use than by belief, holding warmth when it was needed and silence when it was not. The wind shifted. The fog lifted slightly, enough to reveal the far edge of the water before closing it again. At the bait shop, the owner flipped the sign to open. He glanced down the road, then went back inside. Nothing required comment. The town did not ask questions. It noticed patterns. Someone noticed that Iris Calder had raised her gate as usual. Someone noticed that the bolts of fabric in her window were arranged the same way they had been the week before. Someone noticed that Caleb Rowan had returned, walked the harbor road, and kept going. These were not things that demanded reaction. They were simply part of how the day settled into place. By mid-morning, the fog thinned but did not disappear. The ocean continued its steady rhythm. The town worked with its hands, moved through familiar spaces, and allowed silence to remain where it belonged. And in the middle of it all, life went on without needing to explain itself, as it always had, as it was prepared to do again tomorrow. Caleb Rowan woke before the town did, not because an alarm, but because the light had shifted. It was still gray outside, the kind of gray that held no promise of clearing, only of continuing. He lay still for a moment, listening. The ocean was there, as it always was, low and steady, pressing its rhythm through the walls of the small coastal house. Wind moved along the siding and passed on. He got up without hurry. The window faced the water. He opened it a few inches and let the cold air come in. It carried salt and dampness and the faint metallic scent of boats resting against their lines. He stood there long enough for the chill to register, then turned away and began the day. The kettle went on. Not full, just enough. He set the coffee grounds carefully into the press, poured the water slowly, and waited. No radio, no phone. The room filled with the simple sound of water settling and steam lifting. When he poured the coffee, he sat near the window and drank it in small sips. He did not look at the clock. He looked at the water instead, at the way the surface shifted and returned again, never quite repeating itself, never needing to change. Afterward, he opened a notebook. The paper was thick, unlined. He wrote a few lines, then stopped. He sketched the outline of a boat, erased part of it, left the rest. The pencil stayed where it fell. By the time he stepped outside, the fog had thinned but not lifted. It hung low along the road, softening the edges of houses and fences. His boots followed the same path he had taken the day before, and the day before that, down toward the shoreline. The seals were already there. They rested on a low rock just offshore, dark shapes against the gray water. One lifted its head briefly when Caleb approached, then settled again. He stood a short distance away and watched. He did not move closer. He did not take anything out of his pockets. He stayed until they shifted and slipped back into the water, one by one, leaving the rock empty. Further along the shore, fishing boats moved slowly out, engines low, unhurried. Caleb watched them pass through the thinning mist, hulls cutting quiet lines through the water. A man on one boat raised a hand. Caleb raised his in return. Nothing else passed between them. Mid-morning found him near the hardware store, hands wrapped around a piece of driftwood he had picked up along the beach. The wood was smooth in places, rough in others. He brought it inside, set it on the counter, and asked for sandpaper. The owner slid a few sheets across without comment. Caleb worked on the wood outside, sitting on a low stool, sanding slowly, letting the grain guide him. People passed. Some nodded. Some did not. No one stopped to ask what he was making. At noon, he walked to the small diner near the edge of town. He took the same seat he had taken the last time, near the window, but not directly in it. Soup arrived. Bread followed. He ate quietly, left cash on the table, and nodded once to the woman behind the counter on his way out. The afternoon carried him through familiar places. The grocery store, where he bought a few staples and said nothing beyond thank you. The post office, where he checked for mail he did not expect and received none. The library, warm and dim, where he returned a book he had finished and took another from the same shelf. In the late light, which arrived earlier than expected, he stopped near a small repair shop. A sign in the window listed services in faded paint. He stepped inside and asked about a loose hinge on the door of his house. The man behind the counter looked up, nodded, and told him to bring it by tomorrow. As evening settled, the town drew inward. Windows glowed. Smoke rose faintly from a few chimneys. The wind picked up and Caleb closed the window before dark, securing it against the coming night. He heated soup at home and ate standing up, leaning against the counter. When he finished, he rinsed the bowl, set it to dry, and sat again near the window, now closed, listening to the ocean through the glass. On Sunday, he walked past the church, then stopped and turned back. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and something faintly sweet. The pews were worn smooth by use. He took a seat near the back, close to the aisle. He did not bow his head. He did not speak. Light filtered through the narrow windows and settled in uneven patterns along the floor. He sat until the room filled, then until it emptied again. Outside, rain had begun to fall, light and steady. He pulled his coat tighter and walked home through it, letting the dampness settle into the fabric. At the small bar near the corner, he stopped in for one drink. He took a seat at the end, ordered quietly, and listened. The room was warm, the conversations low. He finished, left a bill on the counter, and stepped back into the night. Later, as the wind rose and pressed harder against the house, Caleb closed the shutters, checked the latch twice, and returned to the chair near the window. The notebook lay open on the table. He added one line, then closed it. Outside, the ocean kept its pace. Inside, the day ended the way it had begun, without announcement, without summary, held together by small actions repeated carefully, as if that alone were enough to carry it forward. Iris Calder did not arrive as something new. She was already there. In the town, people knew her by sight long before they knew her name. She walked the same routes, kept the same hours, opened and closed her workshop without spectacle. When she passed, no one turned to look twice, not because she was unnoticed, but because she belonged. That morning, she carried a narrow box under one arm and a canvas bag over her shoulder. The wind pushed lightly against her coat as she crossed the street near the harbor. She adjusted her grip, shifted the weight, and kept going. The dock was damp from overnight mist. Ropes lay coiled where they always did. A fisherman nodded to her as she passed. She nodded back, already stepping around a shallow puddle she had learned to expect. Caleb Rowan saw her before she saw him. He stood near the edge of the dock, hands in his pockets, looking out toward the water. He did not turn when she approached. He did not move out of her way either. There was enough space. There always was. Iris slowed slightly, not to avoid him, not to acknowledge him, but because the boards dipped there, softened by years of weather. She stepped around him without breaking stride. They did not speak. At the far end of the dock, Iris set the box down near a small shed and opened it. Inside were tools wrapped carefully in cloth. She removed one, then another, laying them out with deliberate spacing. She worked with her hands close to her body, movements economical practiced. Caleb watched only long enough to register that she knew what she was doing. Then he looked back to the water. A gull cried overhead and moved on. Later, in the town center, Iris stopped at the grocery store. She bought bread, apples, and a small roll of twine. The clerk rang her up without asking if she needed a bag. She never did. Iris tucked the items into her canvas sack and stepped back outside. Across the street, Caleb exited the hardware store with sandpaper folded under his arm. They reached the curb at the same time and waited for a truck to pass. Iris glanced at the sandpaper, then at the piece of driftwood tucked under his other arm. She said nothing. Caleb noticed that she did not look at his face. When the street cleared, they crossed in parallel. At the corner, Iris turned toward her workshop. Caleb continued toward the post office. No pause. No exchange. In the afternoon, rain came lightly, just enough to darken the wood of the boardwalk and send a few people inside earlier than planned. Iris lowered the metal gate of her workshop halfway, leaving it open to those who knew she was still working. She set the narrow box on the work table and opened it again. Caleb passed by on his way home. The gate caught his attention because it was not fully closed. He slowed, glanced inside, then continued walking. Inside the workshop, Iris worked steadily. Fabric lay draped over the table, pinned but not yet cut. Her hands moved with confidence, adjusting a seam, reinforcing a weak edge. She hummed once, then stopped. Outside, someone walking past noticed that the gate was half raised. Someone else noticed that Iris was inside, still working. No one knocked. As evening approached, the rain eased. Iris stepped outside to lower the gate fully. She wiped her hands on a cloth, folded it once, and placed it back in her bag. Across the street, Caleb stood near the bench that faced the water, the one that rarely held more than one person. Iris paused there, not because of him, but because the rain had left the air sharp and clean. She took in a view briefly, then turned back toward her shop. Caleb shifted slightly to give her room as she passed. Their sleeves brushed just barely. "Evening," he said, not looking at her. "Evening," she replied. That was all. No questions followed. No names were offered. No explanation was expected. Later, as the lights in the town softened and windows began to glow, Iris locked her workshop and walked toward home. She passed the café, where a few people still sat inside, voices low. She did not go in. From across the street, someone noticed that she walked past the door without slowing. Someone else noticed that Caleb Rowan was no longer at the bench. The town absorbed these details without comment. Iris continued on, her pace unchanged, her presence steady. She did not adjust herself to fit anyone else's rhythm. She did not pull anyone into hers. She was not there to lead. She was not there to follow. She was simply there, moving alongside the day, close enough to be felt, distant enough to remain her own. And for now, that was enough. The first real contact happened without ceremony. It took place at the small repair shop near the bend in the road, the one with the faded sign and the door that never closed all the way unless someone remembered to pull it twice. The bell above the frame rang unevenly when it opened, metal on metal, a sound everyone in town recognized. Caleb Rowan stepped inside, holding the loose hinge he had mentioned the day before. He set it gently on the counter, aligning it with the edge without thinking. The man behind the counter nodded once and reached for his tools. Iris Calder was already there. She stood a few feet away at the narrow side table, a length of fabric spread in front of her, hands busy with a small repair. She had chosen the corner spot without asking, the place people used when they needed. A surface but did not need attention. Caleb noticed a reflection first, caught in the glass of a display case. He did not turn right away. Neither did she. The repairman tested the hinge, frowned slightly, then set it aside. "Give me 10 minutes," he said. Caleb nodded. "I will wait." Iris shifted her fabric an inch to the left, clearing space without looking up. Caleb took a step back to give her room, not because she asked, but because the space between them worked better that way. The silence settled easily. Outside, a truck passed. The sound moved through the thin walls and disappeared. Inside, the only noise came from the scratch of Iris's needle and the soft clink of metal as the repairman worked. After a moment, the fabric slipped. It was not dramatic, just a small fold that refused to stay flat. Caleb saw it before Iris did. He reached out and held the edge steady, fingers stopping just short of her hand. She glanced up. "Thanks," she said. "You are welcome," he replied. That was it. She adjusted the fabric, continued working. Caleb let go and stepped back again. No one filled the space with anything else. A few minutes later, the repairman looked up. "You sew," he said to Iris. "Yes," she said. "Good work," he added, already turning back to the hinge. Iris nodded once and returned to the seam. Caleb watched the hinge being tightened, tested, tightened again. When the repairman slid it back across the counter, Caleb picked it up and checked the movement. "Better," the man said. "Yes," Caleb agreed. As he reached for his wallet, Iris folded her fabric and slipped it into her bag. She moved toward the door at the same time Caleb did, not in a hurry, not lingering either. The bell rang again as they stepped outside. The air had cooled. The late afternoon light angled low, turning the damp pavement darker than the surrounding stone. They stood for a brief moment on the narrow sidewalk, deciding directions. Iris adjusted the strap of her bag. "You are heading toward the harbor," she said. "Yes," Caleb replied. "I'm going the other way," she said. He nodded. "Have a good evening." "You too," she answered. They parted without looking back. A block away, Iris stopped at the corner and waited for a car to pass. Caleb continued. Straight, the hinge tucked under his arm. Neither slowed. Neither checked whether the other had turned. From a window of the repair shop, someone noticed the exchange. It was nothing worth mentioning. Just two people using the same space without trouble. Later, as the light faded and the first lamps along the street came on, the town absorbed the moment the way it absorbed everything else. Without comment, without assigning weight. The first contact had not asked for anything. It had not offered anything either. It had simply happened, warm enough to register, quiet enough to pass through unnoticed by anyone who was not already paying attention. The first shift did not begin with an announcement. It began with a door being unlocked earlier than usual. The small community shed near the harbor had been closed for weeks, its hinges stiff, its windows clouded by salt and weather. Inside were things no one had gotten around to fixing yet. A bench with a loose leg, a door frame that no longer met cleanly, a coil of rope that had frayed just enough to be annoying, not enough to be urgent. Caleb Rowan arrived just after the tide began to turn. He carried no toolbox, just his hands, a length of cloth folded into his coat pocket, and the habit of moving deliberately. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and propped it open with a piece of driftwood that fit the angle exactly. Someone across the dock noticed the door open and assumed it had always been that way. Inside, the air was cold and still. Caleb set the cloth on the bench, ran his hand once along the surface, then began. He tightened the loose leg first, testing it with his weight. He adjusted the doorframe next, shaving down the edge until it closed without resistance. He worked slowly, stopping when the light shifted, starting again when it returned. By mid-morning, the shed no longer felt abandoned. A fisherman came by to collect a coil of rope. He paused when he saw Caleb inside, sanding the edge of table. "You open today?" the man asked. Caleb looked up. "No." The fisherman nodded, stepped inside anyway, took what he needed, and left a thermos on the bench without comment. Another man passed and leaned in through the open door. "That hinge was sticking," he said. "It is better now," Caleb replied. The man tested it, once then twice. "Good." He left without asking anything else. Word moved through the town the way it always did. Indirectly, without intention. By the time Iris Calder walked down toward the harbor, the shed door was still open. She noticed it because it usually was not. She did not change her route. She did not slow. She reached the dock and stopped where she had planned to stop anyway, setting down a bundle of fabric she had brought to measure against the light. Only then did she glance toward the shed. Caleb was inside, sleeves rolled up, hands darkened by dust. He did not look like someone performing. He looked like someone finishing a task. She watched for a moment, then turned back to her fabric. The seals surfaced again near the rocks, slipping through the water with quiet ease. Iris measured, marked, and folded. When she was done, she lifted the bundle and walked past the shed. Caleb stepped aside to let her through. She nodded once. He nodded back. That was all. Around noon, the shed filled briefly, not with people gathering, but with people passing through. A coil of rope borrowed. A hammer returned. Someone tested the repaired bench and sat for a minute longer than necessary. No one thanked Caleb in a way that required response. No one praised him. The town did not react the way an outsider might expect. There was no curiosity about why he was there. No speculation about what it meant. No sudden warmth or suspicion. He was treated the way people were treated when they did something useful without asking to be seen. In the afternoon, a woman from the bait shop brought over a bag of nails and set it on the counter. "These were rolling around back there," she said. Caleb looked at them. "Thank you." She shrugged and left. Later, Iris returned to the dock with a length of canvas she needed to air out. The fog had lifted enough for the light to come through cleanly, and she laid the fabric along the railing, weighting the corners. Caleb stepped out of the shed and stood a few feet away, looking toward the water. "They dry faster when the breeze comes in from the west," he said. She glanced at the sky. "It is shifting." "Yes," he said. She did not ask. How he knew. She adjusted the weights and went back to her work. A few minutes later, the breeze arrived. By late afternoon, the shed door was still open, but Caleb was no longer inside. He stood nearby, leaning against the post, sanding a piece of wood he had not finished earlier. A boy stopped his bike and watched. "What are you making?" the boy asked. Caleb looked at the wood. "I'm not sure yet." The boy nodded, satisfied, and rode off. Iris passed again on her way back toward town. She noticed the boy, the sandpaper, the wood, the open door. She did not stop. She did not smile. She did not offer help. Her reaction was not what anyone would have expected if they had been waiting for one. As evening approached, the lights softened. The shed was quieter now, its work done for the day. Caleb swept the floor, stacked the tools he had used, and closed the door halfway. Not locked, just enough. He stepped back and looked once, then turned toward the road. At the corner near the café, Iris stood, waiting for the light to change. Caleb stopped a short distance away. They waited in parallel, neither facing the other. "You finished early," she said. "For today," he replied. She nodded. "The hinge holds." "Yes." The light changed. They crossed. Inside the café, a few people noticed that Caleb did not take his usual table. He stood at the counter, ordered soup, and carried it himself to a smaller seat near the wall. Iris sat 2 tables away, sketchbook open, pencil moving. No one joined either of them. The town absorbed the shift quietly. Caleb had done work he did not need to do. Iris had seen it and let it pass without comment. The town had accepted it without ceremony. Nothing had been solved. Nothing had been offered. But something had changed position, just slightly, the way a piece of furniture does when it is moved an inch to the left. Enough to notice when you walk the room again. Not enough to explain. Outside, the ocean kept its pace. Inside, the cafe filled and emptied, and the shed by the harbor stood a little straighter than it had the day before. The days after the work of the shed did not rearrange themselves. They stayed where they were. Morning still came. In layers. Fog first, then light, then sound. Caleb Rowan kept his routine. Iris Calder kept hers. The town did not ask either of them to explain what had happened, because nothing obvious had happened at all. What changed lived in the space between them. It appeared in small moments, easily missed. In the cafe, Caleb returned to his usual table. Iris sat 2 tables away, close enough to hear the scrape of his chair against the floor when he shifted his weight. Neither looked directly at the other when they arrived. Both knew when the other was there. Caleb lifted his mug, paused, and drank. Iris turned a page, then stopped, pencil hovering. The page stayed blank a few seconds longer than usual before she made the first mark. Across the room, someone coughed. Someone laughed quietly. The window fogged and cleared again as the door opened and closed. Their attention moved, not toward each other, but around each other. On the harbor road, they crossed paths without stopping. The distance between them was measured and unspoken, enough to pass without brushing, close enough to notice pace, posture, direction. Caleb walked closer to the water than he had before. Iris stayed near the buildings, where the wind broke sooner. When they met near the curve in the road, both adjusted slightly, not at the same time, not in the same way. They did not smile. They did not avoid eye contact either. Their eyes met briefly, then moved on, as if acknowledging an object already known. In the afternoons, Iris worked with her door half raised. The gate caught the light and reflected it back into the street. Caleb passed by more than once. Sometimes he slowed. Sometimes he did not. When he did, his gaze stopped at the fabric in her window, at the way the folds were pinned, at the unfinished edges. He never stepped inside. Inside the workshop, Iris noticed a shadow before she noticed him. It moved across the floor, lengthening, then disappearing. She did not look up every time. She looked often enough to know when he was not there. The town noticed these things too, in its own way. At the grocery store, Iris reached for the same loaf of bread Caleb had taken the day before. She picked up the next one instead, identical in weight and color. At the counter, Caleb stood behind her, close enough to hear the rustle of her canvas bag when she shifted it on her shoulder. "You can go ahead," he said. "I'm done," she replied. She stepped aside. He stepped forward. Their hands brushed the same stack of paper bags, then moved away again. Outside, the wind picked up briefly, then settled. Later, near the dock, Caleb stood watching the boats come in. Iris sat on the edge of the wooden steps, repairing a strap. She pulled the thread tight, once, twice, then paused. Her eyes lifted, not to him, but to the water beyond him. Caleb sensed it and turned slightly, enough to see what she was looking at. The tide was coming in slower than expected. He said nothing. She finished the stitch and cut the thread. The sound was small but sharp. Caleb heard it anyway. The tension was not built from words left unsaid. It came from words that were never formed at all. In the evenings, when the light dropped early and the town pulled inward, they occupied the same spaces without sharing them. At the small bar near the corner, Caleb took his usual seat at the end. Iris arrived later, sat farther in, closer to the wall. They did not sit together. They did not sit apart on purpose either. The space arranged itself that way. Someone between them left early. The gap widened. Neither moved to fill it. Caleb finished his drink and stood. Iris remained seated, hands wrapped around her glass. He nodded once as he passed. She returned the nod, just as briefly. Outside, the air was colder than either expected. Iris pulled her coat tighter as she stepped out a few minutes later. She paused just outside the door, letting her eyes adjust. Caleb stood across the street, waiting for the light to change. For a moment, neither crossed. The light shifted. Caleb stepped forward. Iris followed a few steps behind, not rushing, not slowing. In the middle of the street, she stopped briefly to avoid a shallow puddle. Caleb altered his path by a few inches to give her room. They crossed together, not side by side, not separate. On the far curb, Iris let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Across from her, Caleb stood still for a second longer than necessary, then continued walking. Someone watching. From the cafe window, noticed a pause. It looked like nothing. In the quiet after, the town kept breathing. The ocean kept its pace. The fog returned, thin and steady. The routines continued, unchanged in structure, altered only in the way attention moved through them. Neither Caleb nor Iris named what was happening. They did not need to. The space between them held, neither closing nor widening, allowing just enough room for each of them to remain themselves. And in that held space, the days continued, one after another, steady enough to stand in, slow enough to breathe through, asking nothing more than presence. The shift did not announce itself. It settled in quietly, the way weather does when it changes direction without changing temperature. On the harbor road, Caleb Rowan and Iris Calder walked the same stretch more than once that week. Not together, not separately either. Their paths overlapped long enough to notice, then drifted apart again. One afternoon, they reached the bend near the old buoy marker at the same time. The tide was low, exposing dark rock slick with kelp. The wind came off the water and pressed against their coats. Caleb slowed first. "There's a shorter path through the yard," he said, gesturing toward a narrow opening between two weathered houses. "If you're heading back toward town." Iris followed his hand with her eyes. She considered it for a moment. "I will stay on the road," she said. "All right," he replied. He took the path through the yard. She continued along the curve of the road. They stayed in sight of each other for a few seconds. Then the houses broke the line between them. Neither turned back. Later that same day, the opposite happened. Rain began suddenly, fine and cold, the kind that soaked without warning. Iris stepped under the shallow awning of the closed bait shop and waited. Caleb approached from the opposite direction, jacket already darkened by damp. "You can stand here," she said, shifting slightly to make room. He stepped under the awning, leaving a careful space between them. The rain drummed softly against the metal sign overhead. They stood like that for a minute, then another. The rain eased, then stopped. Caleb moved first, stepping back into the open air. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she answered. They walked away in opposite directions. The town noticed. These moments the way it noticed everything else, without naming them. In the cafe, Iris arrived earlier than usual and took a table near the window. Caleb came in later and paused, seeing her there. He chose the counter instead. The distance was intentional, but not defensive. He drank his coffee, standing up. When he turned to leave, Iris looked up. "The road near the dock floods at high tide," she said. He nodded. "I will take the longer way." She returned her attention to the table. It was not advice. It was not concern. It was information, offered and left alone. At the library, Caleb reached for a book Iris had returned the day before. The librarian watched the exchange without comment. Iris stood nearby, flipping through a stack of patterned sheets. "That one is slower than it looks," she said, tapping the cover lightly as she passed. "I have time," he replied. She smiled, just barely, then walked on. In the evenings, they sometimes found themselves moving in the same direction after dark. The streetlights cast uneven circles on the pavement, leaving stretches of shadow between them. One night, they walked side by side for half a block without speaking. Their steps fell into rhythm without effort. At the next corner, Iris stopped. "This is me," she said. "I know," Caleb replied. He continued on alone. No one reached for more than was offered. The trust that formed was small and precise. It did not ask for speed. It did not ask for certainty. It allowed space to remain space. At the repair shop, Iris left a bundle of fabric on the side table while she spoke briefly with the owner. When she returned, the fabric had been shifted slightly, aligned more cleanly with the edge. Caleb stood nearby, waiting for his turn at the counter. She noticed the adjustment. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. He nodded. It was slipping. She took the fabric and left without adding anything else. The town continued its routines around them. Boats came in. Trucks left. Windows lit up at dusk. Nothing in the larger shape of the day changed. Only the way certain moments were handled. There were choices now, to walk together or apart, to speak or not, to take the shorter path or the longer one. None of those choices required explanation. One evening, as they stood near the crosswalk waiting for the light, Iris said, "I will be gone tomorrow morning." "For how long?" Caleb asked. She shrugged. "Just the day." He nodded. "All right." They crossed when the light changed. From the other side of the street, someone watching might have thought the exchange incomplete. It was not. Some questions did not need answers yet. The town held that understanding easily. It always had. And within that understanding, the boundary remained intact, not as a barrier, but as a shape both of them could recognize, one that allowed them to stay, to step back, or to continue forward without being pulled. For now, that was enough. Movement returned to the town in small, uneven ways. Not the kind that drew attention. The kind that passed through and left things almost the same, except for where people chose to stand. The first moment happened on the dock, late afternoon, when the tide came in faster than expected. A skiff bumped hard against its line, the rope slipping along a wet post. The man tying it lost his footing briefly, boots skidding on the slick wood. He caught himself before falling, but the motion sent the rope sliding farther than it should have. Caleb Rowan was close enough to see it, close enough to move. He did not rush. He stepped forward, braced his weight, and held the post steady while the man reset the line. No words were exchanged. No one reached out for help. The balance returned on its own. When it was done, the man nodded once and went back to his work. Caleb stepped away and continued down the dock. From a distance, Iris Calder saw the movement, but not the details. She saw the rope settle, the skiff quiet, the way nothing followed. She did not change her pace. She did not look back. Near rescue did not happen. There was nothing to tell. Later that same day, a different motion. At the grocery store, a jar slipped from the shelf and shattered near the aisle end. Glass spread across the floor in a bright, uneven pattern. People stopped short, waited. Caleb was already kneeling, sweeping the larger pieces into a cardboard tray with practiced care. He worked methodically, not fast, not slow. The clerk handed him a broom. He took it, finished the job, and returned it without comment. Iris arrived at the aisle just as the last fragments were cleared. "Is it done?" she asked. "Yes," the clerk said. Iris nodded and continued on. No one mentioned who had helped. The jar was gone. The floor was clean. Another movement followed, quieter still. In the café, an older woman struggled with the door, her hands full. Caleb reached it first and held it open, stepping aside to let her pass. She murmured thanks without stopping. Iris watched from her table, pencil resting against her page. She did not lift it until the door closed again. That night, the wind picked up suddenly. A loose shutter on the house near the corner rattled hard, striking the siding with each gust. Caleb noticed it on his walk home and stopped. He climbed the short steps, adjusted the latch, and tested it once more before stepping back down. The light inside the house did not turn on. No one opened the door. He walked on. The town absorbed these movements the way it absorbed weather. As part of the background, a different satellite drifted in the next morning. The seals were back on the rocks earlier than usual, resting close together. Iris stood nearby, sketchbook closed, watching them. Caleb stood farther down the shore, hands in his pockets. One of the seals shifted suddenly, slipping partway off the rock before scrambling back up. Water splashed. The others moved, then settled again. Iris took a step forward, then stopped. So did Caleb. Nothing required action. They remained where they were until the seals slipped back into the water, leaving the rock empty once more. Later, at the repair shop, a package sat by the door unclaimed. The label had smeared in the rain, the address barely legible. Iris recognized the name and carried it inside. "It is from Mrs. Harlan," she said. The owner nodded. "I will see her tonight." Iris set the package down, and turned to leave. Caleb held the door open as she passed, then let it close behind her. They did not look at each other. In the afternoon, Iris found the thread she needed was sold out at the fabric store. She hesitated, then chose a different color, close enough to work. At the counter, Caleb stood a few feet behind her with a small bundle of sandpaper and nails. "You could take the last one," she said, nodding toward the spool he had picked up earlier. "It is yours," he replied. "I do not need it." She accepted without comment. That was one of the other motifs. Not generosity, not sacrifice, just an exchange that did not ask for recognition. By evening, the town had moved through its day. A truck stalled briefly near the bend and restarted on its own. A light flickered and steadied. A boat returned late and tied up quietly. Caleb stopped by the shed and found a note left on the bench. Just 2 words written in pencil. "Door sticks." He fixed it before dark and left the note where it was. Iris passed the shed on her way home and noticed the door closing smoothly behind the next person who entered. She noticed the note was gone. She did not stop. At the bar, a man raised his voice too quickly over something small. The bartender set down a glass and waited. The moment passed without escalation. Caleb sat at his usual seat, finished his drink, and left early. Iris arrived later, took a different seat than usual, and stayed until the room emptied. Outside, fog rolled in again, low and even. The streetlights cast soft halos that did not quite touch each other. Someone walking past the cafe noticed that 2 chairs near the window had been left slightly out of line. They adjusted one, then the other before going inside. The town continued to move, not forward, not backward, but sideways, through small gestures that kept the day from tipping too far in any direction. Caleb and Iris remained part of that motion without becoming its center. Nothing dramatic occurred. No problem was solved. No story announced itself. But the rhythm shifted enough to be felt by anyone paying attention. And for those who were not, the town looked exactly the same as it always had. The consequence did not arrive as a confrontation. It arrived as a detail, repeated once in the wrong place. It began at the cafe, early enough that the window still held a thin film of fog. Iris Calder sat at her usual table, sketchbook closed this time, hands wrapped around her mug. Across the room, 2 men spoke quietly near the counter. Their voices stayed low, but the room carried sound the way it always did. "He fixed the shed door," one of them said. The other nodded. "Yeah, and the shutter on Harlan's place. I heard he offered to help Iris with her shop too." The sentence landed, unremarkable, and passed. Iris did not look up. She did not change her posture. She finished her coffee and stood, pulling her coat on slowly, as if the morning required no hurry. Outside, the harbor road was slick with mist. She walked the long way around, past the bait shop, past the bend where the water came close to the pavement. She did not turn toward the shed. Caleb Rowan noticed the change before he understood it. He arrived later than usual that morning and found Iris's workshop gate fully lowered. Not half-raised, fully closed. He paused only long enough to register it, then continued toward the post office. Inside, the clerk handed him a single envelope and said, "She is working late this week." Caleb nodded. "All right." That afternoon, the wrong detail appeared again. At the repair shop, the owner slid a hinge across the counter and said, "You have been busy lately. Folks appreciate it." Caleb tested the hinge once, then again. "It needed fixing," he said. The owner nodded, then added, "Iris does good work too. She keeps to herself." The words were not an accusation. They were not praise. They sat between things slightly misaligned. Caleb paid and left. Later, near the dock, a woman carrying a crate called out, "You are a good man." Caleb stopped, steadied the crate as she set it down, then stepped back. "I'm just passing through," he said. She waved him off and continued on. From the bench near the water, Iris saw the exchange. Not the words, just the shape of it, the pause, the way the woman smiled, the way Caleb stood still for a moment afterward, as if deciding where to put his hands. That evening, Iris took a different seat at the bar. Not her usual one near the wall, but the stool closer to the door. She ordered, drank slowly, and left before the second round was poured. Caleb arrived later and took his place at the end. He noticed the empty stool she usually chose. He did not ask about it. The consequence moved quietly through the next day. At the fabric store, Iris reached for a bolt she had been saving for a specific project. It was gone. The clerk shrugged. Someone bought it this morning. Said it was for repairs. Iris nodded once and chose another, similar but heavier. Outside, Caleb stood near the shed, sanding the edge of a board. A man stopped and said, "You do not have to do everything." Caleb looked up. "I am not." The man hesitated, then walked on. By late afternoon, the town felt the difference without naming it. Not a withdrawal, not a conflict, just a slight reordering. When Caleb passed Iris's workshop, the lights were on, but the gate remained closed. He did not slow this time. Inside, Iris worked longer than planned. She finished a seam she could have left for the morning. She pressed it flat, then pressed it again. When she finally turned off the lights, the sky had already gone dark. They met briefly at the crosswalk. Caleb stood on one side, Iris on the other. "The road near the dock is still flooded," he said. "I know," she replied. The light changed. They crossed in opposite directions. No one followed either of them. The wrong detail repeated only once more. The next morning, the cafe window held a new note on the community board. "Repairs ongoing. Please leave tools where found." No name, no credit. Caleb read it, nodded once, and sat at his table. Across the room, Iris arrived, paused when she saw him, then chose a seat farther away than usual. Not out of avoidance, out of clarity. The town did not correct the misunderstanding. It did not expand it either. The consequence remained small, but real. It did not demand resolution. It simply shifted the distance between two people who had been moving carefully toward each other, reminding both that even quiet things could be misread, and that staying sometimes required stepping back as much as stepping forward. For now, the distance held, and the day continued. The realization did not arrive as a thought Caleb Rowan could name. It arrived as a pattern he stopped interrupting. The town had settled into a quieter version of itself after the small misalignment passed through. The shed remained open only when needed. The cafe returned to its familiar spacing of chairs and cups. Iris Calder kept her gait lowered more often now, not in withdrawal, but in rhythm. Caleb noticed all of it without trying to. He noticed it. One morning while standing near the harbor, watching a boat come in alone. The engine cut early. The hull drifted the last few yards on momentum. The man on board stepped off, tied the line, and did not look back to check whether anyone had been watching. Caleb turned away before the boat was fully secured. He walked the long curve of the road, past the bench, past the place where the water came closest to the pavement at high tide. He did not stop there anymore. He passed it the way he passed most things now, without measuring whether his presence made a difference. At the post office, the clerk handed him a stack of mail thicker than usual. "Forwarding stopped," she said. "Yes," Caleb replied. She slid the stack across and added, "That is good." He nodded and stepped aside to let the next person through. Outside, Iris crossed the street carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. She did not slow when she saw him. She did not speed up either. Their paths aligned briefly, then separated again as she turned toward her workshop. Caleb watched the paper bend slightly at the edges where she held it. He did not follow. The realization took shape later at the library. He stood in front of the same shelf he had returned to more than once, scanning the spines without reaching for any of them. He was not looking for a particular book. He was noticing how little it mattered which one he chose. The librarian glanced up. "You are not borrowing today." "Not today," he said. She nodded and returned to her desk. Caleb stepped outside and stood for a moment on the stone steps, letting the door close behind him. The town moved around him, not toward him. A truck idled at the corner. A woman walked past with a child, speaking quietly. A gull cried somewhere overhead, unseen. For the first time since his return, Caleb did not feel the need to be useful. He walked home and left the tools he had been carrying on the kitchen table. He did not pick them up again that afternoon. Instead, he sat near the window and watched the light change. When the wind picked up, he closed the shutters. When it settled, he opened them again. That evening, he passed the shed and saw that someone else had left the door propped open. He did not go inside. The town did not ask him to. Later, at the cafe, Caleb took his usual table. Iris arrived after him and paused, noticing the room before choosing her seat. She selected a table farther from his than she had before the misinterpretation, but closer than she had in the days immediately after. The space between them felt intentional. Not guarded, not inviting, balanced. Caleb drank his coffee slowly. Iris worked with her hands resting on the table, not sketching, not writing, simply being still. When Iris stood to leave, Caleb looked up. "Your package arrived," he said. She nodded. "I picked it up. That was all." No reference to timing. No follow-up. She left. He remained. The realization sharpened another degree. Caleb understood that the town did not need him to improve it. It did not need him to step in, to repair, to smooth. It needed him to choose how much space he occupied and how often. He walked home under a sky that held its color longer than usual, a thin band of pale light near the horizon that refused to fade. The road felt narrower than it had before, not because it had changed, but because he was no longer trying to walk down the middle of it. On Sunday, he went to the church. He arrived early and took the back pew, as he always did. The building was quiet, filled with the smell of old wood and something faintly sweet. Light filtered through the narrow windows and settled unevenly along the floor. He sat without bowing his head. He spoke nothing. He listened to the room as it filled, then emptied again. When he stepped back outside, the town felt unchanged. That was the point. In the afternoon, Iris walked past his house on her way to deliver a finished piece. She slowed briefly when she noticed the tools still on the table near the window. She did not stop. She did not knock. Later, she passed him on the harbor road. "Are you walking far?" she asked. "Just to the bend," he said. She nodded. "I will turn before that." They walked together for half a block, then parted without ceremony. From the bench near the water, someone watching might have thought the moment incomplete. It was not. Iris respected the shift without naming it. She did not test it. She did not pull against it. She adjusted her own movement and let the space remain what it was. That was how she showed it. The town noticed in its quiet way. At the repair shop, the owner fixed the hinge himself. At the shed, someone else swept the floor. At the cafe, a new note appeared on the board, written in a familiar hand. "Use what you need. Return what you can." No one signed it. Caleb read it, smiled once, and sat down. He understood now that staying did not mean contributing more. It meant contributing correctly. It meant knowing when to act and when to let the rhythm carry itself forward. From the window, he saw Iris pass again, her pace steady, her attention forward. She did not look toward him this time. That, too, felt right. As evening came on, the town breathed in and out the way it always had. Windows glowed. Doors closed. The ocean kept its pace. Someone noticed that Caleb Rowan no longer hovered at the edges of things. Someone noticed that Iris Calder moved through her days without adjusting for anyone else. Neither observation required comment. The realization settled fully then, not as a conclusion, but as a placement. Caleb was no longer a presence to be measured. He was simply part of the pattern, no heavier than any other, no lighter either. And in that understanding, the town made room for him the way it made room for everything that learned how to stay without taking more than it needed. The day ended quietly. Nothing was resolved. Everything was in place. The routine returned without ceremony. Not all at once. Not as a reset. It came back in pieces, familiar shapes arranged in a slightly different order, like furniture moved just enough to change how the room was used. Caleb Rowan woke before the light again, but he did not open the window right away. He lay still and listened first. The ocean was there, steady as ever. Wind brushed the siding and moved on. When he did open the window, only a few inches, the cold air fell sharper than it had before, or perhaps he noticed it more clearly now. He made his coffee the same way. Grounds measured by habit. Water poured slowly. The press waited. He drank it near the window, but his gaze did not stay on the horizon this time. It moved inward, toward the room, toward the quiet order of things he had placed where they belonged. The notebook remained closed on the table. Instead of writing, He stepped outside earlier than usual and walked toward the harbor while the fog still clung low to the road. His path took him past the bench first, then the post office, then the bend near the water. Before, he would have gone straight to the shoreline. Now he took the longer curve, the one that passed the backs of houses and the narrow yards where nothing was meant to be seen. The seals were not on the rocks that morning. The water lay flat and gray, unbroken. Caleb stopped anyway, stood for a moment, then continued on. At the grocery store, he picked up fewer things than he had before. Bread, soup, apples. He nodded to the clerk and stepped aside without waiting for conversation. Outside, he paused to let a woman with a cart pass, then went on his way. Across town, Iris called her, open her workshop as she always did, but she did not raise the gate halfway this time. She opened it fully, let the morning light come in, then lowered it again after an hour. Her work moved forward in a different rhythm now. She cut fabric before checking measurements. She finished seams she once would have left for later. When Caleb passed by, he noticed the gate was down and kept walking. The cafe received him at a different hour than before. Not earlier, not later, just shifted. He took his usual table, but he did not stay long. He drank his coffee, left the mug where it was, and stood. Iris arrived after he left and took the table near the window. She noticed the chair across from her had been pushed in more neatly than usual. She did not adjust it. They crossed paths on the harbor road again that afternoon. This time, Caleb was coming back toward town. Iris was heading out, carrying a finished piece wrapped in cloth. They saw each other from a distance and made no change until they were closer. When they passed, Iris said, "The wind is picking up." "Yes," Caleb replied. "It will turn soon." They did not slow. The afternoon settled into its familiar. Quiet. Boats came in. Nets were folded. The shed door opened once, then closed again. Someone else swept the floor inside. Caleb did not look in. In the early evening, he walked to the small bar near the corner, but did not go inside. He paused at the door, listened to the sound of voices and glasses, then turned away. He went home instead, closed the shutters against the wind, and ate standing up in the kitchen. Later, he walked again, this time along the darker stretch of road where the street lights thinned. The fog rolled in low, softening edges. The town felt smaller that way, not because it had shrunk, but because it was being seen without effort. Iris finished her work later than planned. When she stepped outside, the air was damp and cool. She locked the door, tested the handle once, then turned toward home. At the corner, she saw Caleb waiting for the light. She took her place a few feet away. They did not speak. When the light changed, they crossed together, not in step, not apart. On the other side, Iris turned first. "Good night," she said. "Good night," Caleb replied. They went their separate ways. The routine held. Same streets, same buildings, same ocean moving at the same pace. But the meaning of certain pauses had changed. The places where one lingered, where one passed through, where one no longer stopped. There was no marker to note it, no moment that could be pointed to as the difference. Only the sense that the town remained exactly as it was, while the people within it had learned where they stood and where they did not need to stand anymore. Maine stayed quiet, and within that quiet, the days continued, steady and unremarkable, carrying forward a rhythm that no longer required adjustment, only attention. The town remained, not in the way people talked about it, but in the way it continued without needing to be noticed. Morning light still reached the harbor through low clouds. The ocean still moved at its patient pace. The road along the water still curved where it always had, shaped by weather rather than intention. Caleb Rowan stood near the cafe window, finishing his coffee. He did not look for anyone. He did not need to. When he left, he placed the mug back where it belonged and stepped outside, into the damp air. Across town, Iris Calder closed her workshop for the day. She folded a piece of fabric, smoothed it once with her palm, and set it aside for the morning. When she locked the door, she tested the handle lightly, then turned toward home. They passed each other later near the harbor, just as the light thinned and the fog began to return. No words were exchanged this time. There was no need to mark the moment. The distance between them held its shape, neither closing nor widening. The shed by the dock stood quiet. The bench inside remained steady. Someone else would use it tomorrow. Or not. The door would open when it was needed and stay closed when it was not. Boats came in at their usual hour. Nets were folded. A gull called once and moved on. The tide shifted without ceremony. In the cafe, chairs were stacked. Someone wiped the counter. The chalkboard menu remained unchanged. At the window, 2 seats faced the harbor, empty now, waiting for whoever came next. The town did not remember everything that passed through it. It did not need to. It held what mattered and let the rest move on. Some people stayed because they were born there. Some stayed because they returned. Some stayed because they learned how to remain without taking up more space than the day allowed. That was the quiet order that had formed, not built by effort, not maintained by force, but shaped by attention, by restraint, by the understanding that presence did not always require action, and that value did not need to announce itself. Caleb walked home as the fog settled low along the road. Iris turned down a side street and disappeared from view. The paths did not cross again that night. The town stayed open to the next morning. Lights would turn on. Doors would open. Someone would notice something small and adjust it without comment. And those who wished to remain would find that the town did not ask them to explain why. It simply made room. Some stayed. Some returned. Some waited. And the town remained there for all of them, unchanged on the surface, quietly alive beneath it, ready to continue at the same patient pace. Those who lingered could stay with it a little longer, just as it was, without needing to decide anything. Yet,